Hello freedom lovers, it's another edition of Patriot Network TV. Today we want to talk about the Climategate scandal, and I want to preface this with a few words about how I have railed against this particular fraud for years. Was always convinced it was a fraud because the data didn't seem to back up the claims that were being made. Now, for those of you who listen to me on the radio, KYCA 1490 on your AM dials, Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., you've heard Dr. Tim Ball speak on the radio show. I've had him on a couple of times. He is a retired climatologist from Canada, and he was one of the first Canadians to hold a PhD in climatology. Did his doctoral dissertation on the climate back in the early days of Canada, and what he had was the actual data from the Hudson Bay trading posts located out and about in the wild beyond the outback of Canada. Tim is thoroughly unconvinced, as am I, that global warming is a catastrophic threat, and on November 21st, 2009, he wrote, and this is an editorial that he posted in, which Canadian paper? Let's see here. He posted this in, I'll have to give it to you at the end. I want to read this to you. I want to read this to you and get it out verbatim. I don't want to misquote Dr. Ball here in the paper, but I want to, at a couple of points I'll stop and add a few words. Here we go. Dr. Tim Ball, Saturday, November 21st, 2009. Global warming is often called a hoax. I disagree because a hoax has a humorous intent to puncture pomposity. In science, such as with the Piltdown Man hoax, it was done to expose those with fervent but blind belief. The argument that global warming is due to humans, known as anthropogenic global warming theory, AGW, is a deliberate fraud. Now I want to repeat that for you. Dr. Ball, who spent his entire adult life as a climatologist, 30-some years in the university setting, published numerous articles and spoke at great length on the data here. He says, and I quote, AGW, anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming, is a deliberate fraud. I can now make that statement without fear of contradiction because of a remarkable hacking of files that provided not just a smoking gun, but an entire battery of machine guns. Someone hacked into the files of the Climatic Research Unit, CRU, based at the University of East Anglia. A very large file, 61 megabytes, was downloaded and posted to the web. Phil Jones, director of the CRU, acknowledges the files are theirs. They contain papers, documents, letters, and emails. The latter are the most damaging and contain blunt information about the degree of manipulation of climate science in general and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in particular. Dominant names involved are ones I have followed throughout my career, including Phil Jones, Benjamin Santer, Michael Mann, Kevin Trenberth, Jonathan Overpeck, Ken Brifra, Tom Wigley. Now, just a little footnote here. These are the people who Professor Wegman, when he testified before the House panel on environment, said had entered together into a cabal and were committing various errors. Professor Wegman, you may recall from his testimony before the House, said that given the data that Dr. Mann had, none of the conclusions he drew were valid. The data that he had did not support any of the conclusions he drew, and the hockey stick itself, the famous graph that shows temperature going along and then suddenly an exponential increase, the hockey stick itself was wrong. It was based on bad science and bad statistics, and Dr. Wegman called for an immediate academic relationship with statistics and climatology so they could prevent themselves from making future errors of the same kind. Now, these guys have been the ultimate gurus of the man-made climate warming alarmist scenarios. These are the guys who have told, whispered in Gore's ear and said the sea will rise 20 feet, and they have the global mean temperature will increase by 7 degrees. Okay, back to Dr. Ball. I have watched climate science hijacked and corrupted by this small group of scientists. This small elite community was named by Professor Wegman in his report to the National Academy of Sciences, named in a very derogatory way. I've had the pleasure of meeting the founder of CRU, Professor Hubert Lamb, considered the father of modern climatology on a couple of occasions. He also peer-reviewed one of my early publications. I know he would be mortified with what was disclosed in the last couple of days. Jones claims the files were obtained illegally, as if that absolves the content. Can you say Pentagon Papers? It doesn't, and it doesn't absolve them, and it isn't enough to destroy, and it is enough, to destroy all their careers. Jones gave a foretaste of his behavior in 2005. Warwick Hughes asked for the data method that he used in his claim of 0.6 degree centigrade temperature rise since the end of the 19th century. Jones responded, "We have 25 years or so invested in this work. Why should I make the data available to you when your aim is to try and find something wrong with it?" He has stonewalled ever since. The main reason was because it was used as a key argument in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports to convince the world humans caused rapid warming in the 20th century. The emails obtained are a frightening record of arrogance and deception far beyond the 2005 effort. Another glimpse into what the files and emails reveal was the report by Professor Deming. He wrote, "With publication of an article in Science in 1995, I gained sufficient credibility in the community of scientists working on climate change. They thought I was one of them, someone who would pervert science in the service of social and political causes. So one of them let his guard down. A major person working in the area of climate change and global warming sent me an astonishing email that said, 'We must get rid of the medieval warm period.' The person in question was Jonathan Overpeck, and his even more revealing emails are part of those exposed by the hacker. It is now very clear that Deming's charge was precise. They have perverted science in the service of social and political causes." Professor Wegman showed that this community of scientists published together and peer-reviewed each other's work. I have always been suspicious about why peer review was such a big deal. Now all of my suspicions are confirmed. The emails reveal how they controlled the process, including manipulating some of the major journals like Science and Nature. We know the editor of the journal Climate, Andrew Weaver, was one of the community. They organized lists of reviewers when required, making sure they gave the editor only favorable names. They threatened to isolate and marginalize any editor who behaved in a way that was recalcitrant. Total control. These people controlled the global weather data used by the IPCC through the joint Hadley and CRU and produced the HAD-CRUT data set. They controlled the IPCC, especially crucial chapters, and especially preparation of the summary for policymakers. Stephen Schneider was a prime mover there from the earliest report to the most influential in 2001. They also had a left-wing conduit to the New York Times. The emails between Andy Revkin, New York Times reporter, and the community were very revealing and must place his journalistic integrity in serious jeopardy. Surely this is the death knell for the CRU, the IPCC, Kyoto, and Copenhagen, and the carbon credits shell game. CO2 never was a problem, and all the machinations and deceptions exposed by these files proved that it was the greatest deception in history, but nobody is laughing. It is a very sad day for science, and especially my chosen area of climate science. We'll call this quits for today, and we'll go on to the other one. Very last note here, have a very happy Thanksgiving. Please read the 100th Psalm, raise up your voice in a joyous noise to the Lord, and give thanks that you live in a free country where the truth can come out, albeit very slowly, but the truth can come out, and some poor little guy in the middle of nowhere in Prescott, Arizona like me can say, "Hey, I told you that this was what was going on." Now remember, you have to act on this. No more money for climate change legislation, no cap and trade bill, no more stealing of public funds for private agendas, no more loss of freedom or liberty so that somebody can feel good about an alleged boogeyman in the closet.